Mila Mateza will be back after the break. Welcome back. We are discussing here on Rights and Recourse the Credit Information Amnesty report whose recommendations were accepted by Cabinet last Thursday. Mr. Netshitenzhe, one would imagine that there will be a time frame when these recommendations will be phased in. It's not going to happen like that hammer we have, that little hammer we have there.
No, thanks. As we said, there will be a notice preferably during October. It will be for consultation with the wider public. And if I may clarify, is that this is no longer a once-off removal of that adverse information. It is on continuous basis. And therefore, come October, consultation concluded and an issuance of the final notice will be in November. And then from November onwards, there will be education and awareness to the public so that people can come forth for the removal of that information. And then when it is being implemented on a continuous basis, we should also start to monitor and evaluate whether it is effective to the general public for the removal of that information. And then when that is done, evaluation and monitoring, we will be improving. We will have a final report, say February, March, in so much that therefore we also improve depending on the outcome of monitoring and evaluation.
Stephen, if I understand you clearly, you are saying it is not the debt that is being removed, it is the adverse information on your debt. But how is this going to help the consumer?
Well, consumers are barred from getting credit if they have a very negative credit record. So the key thing is to improve the consumer's credit record so that they can get the credit that they would deserve. The key safeguard is that they must be able to afford the credit that they're looking for. So at the moment we have many millions of consumers who are able to afford credit, but they can't get it because they've got adverse information that's on their credit record. So what the government is trying to do is to remove some of that, or even all of that, not all of it, usually only some of it, some of the adverse information, so as to enable consumers to get credit, because they believe, I think, that credit is a stimulus for the economy and it will help growth. So I think the idea here is to help those consumers who can afford credit to be able to access the credit that at the moment they can't get because they're blacklisted.
In other words, I seem not to, there's a dichotomy here. I seem not to understand. Government is trying to get movement in the economy. Those people who have adverse information on their credit cannot get credit.
Yeah.
So why would the banks be opposed to something like that?
Well, the banks say that it makes it more difficult for them to price for credit risk, for the probability of default. But given that adverse information is such a small part of your credit record, that most of your credit information sits in your payment profile, which is how you've paid. Whether you've paid, for example, in July or August or September, is reflected in your payment profile, either as payment or non-payment. Now that is not going to be removed, and there's at least, up to 5 years of that information can be recorded. At the moment, up to between 24 months and 36 months of that information is recorded. So it's a very extensive set of data that can be used to price for credit. And I understand that the National Credit Regulator has already done actuarial studies to determine what the impact of this removal of adverse information would be, and has found that it wouldn't be as negative as some credit providers fear.
McDonald, the issue I wanted to pose with you, stretch a little bit, is you said there's going to be education for the consumer. Who is going to be doing this education, and what form is it going to take?
Yes, thank you. Education and awareness Generally, the DTI and Parliament produce laws, and then in the olden days, we used to produce these laws, and then they gather dust. There is no understanding by the public that there is something good for them. Nowadays, like in the DTI, all laws that are produced, say by the policy and legislation unit, there should be a directorate that is active in educating the public through workshop, media, like what we are doing now, doing a symposium, conferences, and writing articles in the media, print, and then also the National Credit Regulator. It's one of its functions is to educate the public, so they will follow the same trend, and then there may be adverts. And then there must be a champion. The minister may be a champion or his deputies, in so much that therefore it should reach people through the radios and TVs.
You mentioned earlier, you did allude to the fact that this is not the first amnesty, and you did try and make the difference between this amnesty and the last amnesty. Could you just repeat that for the benefit of our viewers who might not have picked that up?
Yes, the last credit amnesty, 6 months after the Act came into being, in 2008 and 9, it was a once-off. Now, this one will be on a continuous basis. So therefore, if a person settles the debt and then or has got a capability of settling the debt, is credit worthy, then information should be removed. And if everything is paid, judgments can be removed, and therefore it should be on a continuous basis.
Stephen, there's listening to McDonald, especially with regard to education, there's a role to play for both the credit provider and the National Credit Regulator in terms of education. From the credit provider point of view, they must make sure that there's an affordability test that's being done.
Yeah, look, the affordability testing hasn't been done on a consistent basis. So what many credit providers are doing some level of affordability testing, but many are not. Many are not, for example, checking that you actually have the income that you claim. And the National Credit Regulator, I understand, is concerned that, for example, necessary expenses are just accepted without any investigation, because they've seen in their audits that some necessary expenses for accommodation have been declared at 39 Rand. And we know that it's very difficult to get credit if you have to lie for it by saying your accommodation or your transport or your food expenses are ridiculous. So I think that they are trying to make sure that the affordability assessment is reasonable and that it's not just a joke, that credit providers actually have to do something meaningful.
In other words, we'll have to do the dreaded thing of list all the things that you are paying for presently before we can give you credit.
I think that's what they're aiming at, yes.
I've gone through that a number of times, and it's a very tedious thing to do. Why is it that, what is the role of the credit bureau in this whole thing?
Well, you know, the credit bureaus are a kind of library. They hold credit information and they sell it. So unlike a normal library that gives it away, they sell it and they believe that the information is very valuable. So they don't like to lose any information because, of course, that would affect their ability to sell it. But they have to, once this proclamation is made, they have to remove this information. There's no need for the consumer to do anything. The consumer will just be benefited because their credit profile will automatically be improved by operation of what the credit bureaus have to do. In other words, the credit information will be removed by the credit bureaus because they are following the proclamation. They will, in their IT programs, make it a requirement that when something is paid, the credit providers must notify them that payment has been made, and then on that basis it will be removed.
After the break, we'll try and find out more as to whether the credit bureaus are going along with this. We've already heard there's some opposition from the banks, but don't go away. Please join us again as we come back right after this.